Clay Landry had nothing left to give the world, not after what it took from him. He used to be someone, at least in the eyes of his wife and little girl. Used to be a man who had a reason to get up in the morning, saddle his horse, and ride out to mend fences or haul firewood before snow settled too deep. Now, he moved like a man underwater, slow, empty, like his chest didn't quite know how to breathe anymore. The cabin he lived in stood quiet at the edge of a dry meadow in Wyoming territory, a good half-day's ride from the nearest town. It was the kind of quiet that didn't heal. It hollowed. The cold had already started creeping in early that year. September brought wind that cut straight through coats and skin. The pine trees around his place whispered things he didn't want to hear. He kept a bottle close, but not too close. He wasn't ready to lose himself that way. Not yet. He still chopped wood, mostly out of habit. Still fixed things around the property like he expected someone to notice. But nobody came anymore. Not since Clara and Annie died. The fever took them fast. 1 week, Annie was running around barefoot in the sun with a wildflower crown tangled in her hair, cheeks red with laughter. The next, she was burning up in her little bed, arms reaching for Clay like he could fix what no doctor could. Clara held on a little longer, mostly because she wouldn't let go until Annie did. And after that, just 2 graves side by side on the back hill under a crooked cedar tree. Clay dug them both with his bare hands. No preacher, no neighbors, just him, 2 shovels, and a sky that didn't care. He didn't pray anymore. Whatever kind of God allowed a man to watch his wife and child die slow and helpless didn't deserve his prayers. It had been nearly 2 years since that winter. Clay had stopped counting days. Time passed like it was dragging itself through mud. He'd tried going into town once or twice, mostly when supplies ran low. Folks whispered. Some gave him the look, the one that held pity with a touch of fear. Nobody asked how he was doing. They didn't have to. You could see it plain on his face. Something inside him had gone dark and stayed that way. He wasn't angry. Not anymore. Just tired. There were mornings he sat on the porch, rifle across his lap, and stared out toward the horizon like maybe, just maybe, he'd catch sight of something worth living for. Mostly, he didn't. So when the wagon appeared down the trail one dusty afternoon, he thought for a second he was seeing things. The trail didn't bring people here. He hadn't had a visitor in over a year. He didn't move. Just watched from the porch, squinting against the sun as the wagon rolled closer, wheels groaning like old bones. It was a woman driving. She was small, narrow-shouldered, with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low and 2 children tucked in beside her. Clay blinked, leaned forward a little. She looked worn out, not from the road, but from life. Her dress was plain and dusty. The boy beside her looked to be about 10, sharp-eyed, holding on tight to the edge of the seat. The girl was younger, maybe 5, with a mop of tangled hair and a thumb stuck in her mouth. They didn't belong out here, not like this. Clay stood, stiff from sitting too long. His voice cracked when he spoke. "You lost." The woman didn't answer right away. She stopped the wagon a few yards from his porch and looked at him with the kind of steady gaze that told him she wasn't scared, just desperate. "No, sir," she said. "We came to find you." That made his skin go tight. "Me?" She nodded. "Your name's Clay Landry?" He hesitated. "Used to be." She climbed down slowly, her knees buckling a bit when her boots hit the ground. She moved like someone who'd been pushing too hard for too long. "My name's Ruthie Holloway," she said. "These are my children, Luke and Susie." Clay looked from her to the kids, still not understanding. "You got the wrong man." "I don't," she said. "You knew my husband, Daniel." Clay froze. He hadn't heard that name in years. Daniel Holloway. They'd served together for 6 months during the tail end of the war. Not close friends, but the kind of men who'd shared a trench, passed the same bottle, and promised to check in if something ever happened. Clay hadn't thought about him in a long time. Daniel was one of the good ones. Died trying to help civilians cross a frozen river in Tennessee. "I'm sorry," Clay said, his voice quieter. "He was a good man." Ruthie nodded. Her eyes were dry, but her hands trembled where they clutched the side of the wagon. "Before he died, he wrote me a letter. Said if anything ever happened, I should find you. Bet you'd help. Clay felt the wind go out of him. That was a long time ago. We've been living near Fort Bridger, she said. But things turned bad. I got sick. Lost the house. There was a man there. My landlord. He said I owed him. He started coming around. Wouldn't leave us be. We had to go. Clay looked again at the children. The boy stared back, protective. The girl leaned against her mother's skirt. Ruthie took a step forward, her voice shaking now. I wouldn't be here if I had anywhere else to go. He didn't answer right away. The wind picked up, rustling the dry grass and the hem of her skirt. Clay ran a hand through his hair, rough and still dusted with sawdust from earlier. I ain't who I used to be, he said quietly. She looked him straight in the eye. They don't need who you used to be. They need someone now. He could have said no, could have turned and walked inside and let them go on to wherever the next stop was. But something in her words stuck. Not for her, for the kids, for that boy who looked ready to fight the world to protect his mother, for the little girl with her arms wrapped around a worn-out doll like it was the only thing she owned. He saw Annie in her, and that broke him more than anything. Clay stepped down off the porch. I got a spare room, he said. It's not much. Ruthie exhaled like she hadn't breathed in a week. That's more than we had yesterday. He helped unload the wagon in silence, carried boxes inside, showed them where things were, pointed out the outhouse and the well. The sun dipped low behind a ridge, casting long shadows across the dirt yard. That night, after they were settled in and the children were asleep on makeshift beds, Clay sat alone on the porch again. But this time, he wasn't thinking about dying. He was thinking about what it meant that a man like Daniel Holloway still believed in him after all these years, and about a woman who'd come through hell just to find a safe place for her children. For the first time in a long time, Clay didn't feel alone. And for the first time, he wondered what might happen if he stopped trying to forget the world and started living in it again. The morning came early, with pale light creeping across the wooden floorboards and the distant cry of a hawk overhead. Clay rose before the others, out of habit more than anything else. He moved through the quiet cabin with care, stoking the stove and setting water to boil. For a man who hadn't spoken more than a few words a day for nearly 2 years, he found the silence suddenly heavier with 4 souls under one roof. There was something delicate about it all, like if he breathed too loud, it might all vanish. The boy, Luke, was the first to come out. He was already dressed, boots laced tight, eyes watchful. He didn't say much, just nodded at Clay and sat by the stove, rubbing his hands together. Clay handed him a mug of hot water with a pinch of honey. Luke drank it like it was a rare treat. You work? Clay asked, not unkindly. Luke met his gaze. When I have to, you'll have to hear. The boy nodded. I figured. Later, Ruthie came out with Susie curled against her hip, both of them sleepy-eyed and wrapped in worn shawls. Ruthie looked better in the daylight, still tired, still pale, but stronger than she had the day before. She had a way of holding herself upright, like the world had knocked her down 1,000 times, and she'd gone back up every single one. They ate breakfast in near silence. Ruthie offered to wash the dishes, and Clay didn't argue. Luke followed him outside to help with the chores. The boy was quiet, but quick to learn. He split wood without being asked, helped haul water, even checked the hen house like he'd done it 100 times before. Clay watched him closely. The boy had the kind of eyes that were always looking for trouble, always calculating risk. He wasn't just cautious, he was waiting for something. By the second day, the rhythm of the cabin had shifted. Ruthie swept the floor and cleaned out the pantry, muttering about spoiled flour and dried-up beans. Clay didn't tell her to stop. Truth was, the place hadn't seen that kind of care in a long time. Susie followed her mother around like a shadow, except when she wandered outside to chase chickens or stare at the big sky with her thumb in her mouth. Luke stayed close to Clay, helping him repair a section of the corral fence that had been sagging for months. You got family? Luke asked while hammering nails. Not anymore, Clay said. The boy didn't push, but he watched, always watched. Clay began to see it in the small things. How Luke never let Susie out of his sight for long. How he flinched when anyone raised their voice, even a little. Something had happened to that boy that went beyond losing a father. Clay asked Ruthie about it one evening after the children were asleep. They sat on the porch, both of them nursing mugs of weak coffee. The wind had picked up, stirring the scent of pine and smoke. "You ever going to tell me what really happened back in Bridger?" he asked, his tone even. Ruthie didn't answer right away. She looked out toward the darkness, arms wrapped tight across her chest. "There was a man," she said finally. "His name was Walter Griggs. He owned the boarding house we were staying in. Said I was behind on rent, that I could work it off. Started making visits late at night. At first, I kept the door locked. Then he started waiting for Luke to go to the market. Came inside while I was alone with Susie. Told me he'd take her if I didn't. Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. We left the next day. Left everything." Clay's hands tightened around the mug. He didn't speak, didn't ask any more questions. He didn't need to. He knew the type. Men who fed on fear, who preyed on women who had no one to turn to. He'd met them in the war. He'd met them in saloons, in mining towns, in backwater settlements with no sheriff for miles. But there was something she hadn't said. He could see it in the way her eyes wouldn't meet his, how her hands trembled even when she tried to act steady. Ruthie was keeping something else locked behind her teeth. And Luke, he knew. Clay was sure of it. That boy had seen things no child should. Around the fourth day, the first real visitor arrived. He came up the trail on a black gelding, a big man with a square jaw and a worn-out Union jacket slung over his saddle. His name was Jack Bellamy. Used to ride with Clay in the early days before Clara. Now he ran a livery stable down in Pine Hollow, 20 miles south. "I heard a rumor you were alive," Jack said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Clay offered him coffee, and they sat out by the barn where the children wouldn't hear. Jack looked toward the cabin. "They a new family?" "No," Clay said flatly. "They're staying for a while." Jack raised a brow but didn't press. "You hear about Griggs?" Clay's body went still. "He's been nosing around. Said someone stole from him. Got the sheriff half listening, but not enough to raise a posse. He's got money. Pull. Folks keep quiet." Clay didn't answer right away. Jack leaned a little. "If you're going to shelter a woman with a man like that looking, you better be ready." "I'm always ready." Jack stood and dusted off his coat. "You should come down to town more often. You're starting to look like a ghost." When Jack rode off, Clay stood there for a long time, watching the trail like it might grow teeth. That night, he saw Luke outside after dark, crouched by the barn with a stick, drawing something in the dirt. Clay walked over quietly. The boy didn't flinch, just kept carving lines into the earth. "What's that?" Clay asked. Luke shrugged. "A plan." Clay knelt beside him. The dirt drawing showed the cabin, the barn, the hill behind it, even the chicken coop. "You expecting trouble?" Luke didn't look up. "I just like to be ready." Clay didn't laugh. He understood too well. As the days passed, Clay began noticing more signs that this wasn't just a family on the run. Luke kept a small knife under his pillow. Ruthie checked the locks 3 times before bed. Susie sometimes woke up screaming, whispering, "Don't let him in." And Ruthie, sometimes she disappeared for hours into the woods, saying she needed to clear her head. Clay followed once. She just stood there by the creek, eyes red, lips moving in silent prayer or argument. He didn't interrupt. There was something more than fear driving her. Something she hadn't told even the boy. One evening, as they sat around a fire outside, Ruthie finally asked, "Why did you really say yes to us?" Clay thought about lying, about saying it was Daniel's letter, or pity, or loneliness. But he looked across the fire at Susie curled up in her mother's lap, and Luke sitting close to the flames with his knees drawn up, and he said, "Because I needed something to matter again." Ruthie nodded, like she understood that better than anyone. Later that night, long after the fire was out and the cabin had gone quiet, Ruthie opened the drawer beneath the bed and stared at what lay inside. A revolver. Loaded. She touched it like it was an old friend. She didn't want to use it, but she would if she had to, because Clay didn't know it yet, but Walter Griggs wasn't done looking. And Ruthie hadn't told him the worst part. Griggs thought Susie was his. The wind had changed. Clay felt it in his bones before he saw it in the sky. The air smelled different, too sharp like iron and cold sweat. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Ruthie and the children arrived, and though the days had begun to settle into a rhythm, there was an edge to everything now, like a rope pulled too tight. It started with the tracks. Clay was checking the traps out near the ravine when he noticed hoof prints. Deep, fresh, too fresh. Someone had ridden through the property, not along the trail, but across the tree line where they could watch the house without being seen. He crouched near one print, rubbing a finger through the soil. One rider, light, moving slow. He didn't say anything when he got back, just cleaned his rifle and checked the ammunition in the drawer by the door. Ruthie noticed, of course. She always did. "You expecting someone?" "No." She didn't push, but her lips pressed thin and her eyes darted toward the window. Clay saw her shadow by the curtain later that night, watching the tree lean, waiting for a shape that hadn't yet appeared. The next day, Clay rode into Pine Hollow for supplies. Jack Bellamy met him near the post office, arms crossed, mouth tight. "You're being watched," he said. Clay didn't pretend to be surprised. "Griggs was here 2 days ago, asking about a woman with 2 kids. Showed a photograph. Sheriff turned him away, but not too hard. Man's got half the town eating from his hand." Clay spat into the dirt. "He make it known where he's heading next?" Jack shook his head. "But I'd bet every nail in my shop he's already been out to your place. Just watching. Waiting." Clay's jaw clenched. "Then next time, he won't leave watching." He returned home just before dusk, leading the mule loaded with flour, sugar, and nails. Ruthie came to meet him at the gate, wiping her hands on her apron, but her smile faded when she saw his face. "Trouble's close," he said, handing her the bag. "You and the kids stay close to the house." Doors locked. That night, the tension in the cabin thickened like a storm rolling low. Luke wouldn't go to sleep. He sat in the corner with a stick in his hands, sharpening the end into a point. Ruthie kept glancing toward the windows. Even Susie, usually the first to nod off after supper, was restless, clinging to her mother with wide, watery eyes. And sometime after midnight, Clay heard the dog barking. He was out the door with his rifle in seconds, boots thudding across the porch. The dog's barks turned frantic, then stopped all at once. The silence that followed was worse than noise. Clay raised the rifle and moved toward the barn, every hair on his neck standing up. He found a dog dead, neck twisted, no blood. Just a message. Someone had been close, too close. He didn't sleep. Sat at the window till dawn, eyes on the trees. The next morning, Ruthie came to him with a look in her eyes he hadn't seen before. "Guilt. There's something you need to know," she said, her voice low. "About Susie." Clay waited. "She's not Daniel's," she said, voice trembling. "She's Griggs's. He forced himself on me months before Daniel died. I didn't tell anyone. Daniel never knew. After he died, Griggs came back. Said I owed him. Said Susie was proof that I belonged to him." Clay felt the ground shift beneath him. "She doesn't know," Ruthie said quickly. "And I don't want her to. She's mine, Clay. Mine and nobody else's." He stared at her, hands knotted into fists. Rage rose up like bile, but it wasn't at Ruthie. It was at the man who'd hunted them like animals, who thought he had a right to claim anything with breath and blood. "He'll come for her," Clay said. "Not just you. I know, and he won't stop unless I put him in the ground." Ruthie's silence was answer enough. From then on, every hour turned heavier. Clay built new locks for the doors, wired bells near the windows. He taught Luke how to fire a rifle, how to load it, how to clean it with quiet hands and sharp eyes. The boy never asked why. He already knew. It took shifts. Nights were longest. Ruthie would sleep with Susie clutched tight, and Clay would pace like a sentry. He hated the fear in her eyes, hated that it made her fold herself smaller. But then came the worst part. Jack Bellamy showed up again, this time with a bloody lip and a warning in his mouth. "Sheriff's been bought," he said, wiping his face with a rag. Griggs is coming with 2 men. Said he's got papers claiming Ruthie kidnapped his child. Judge in Cheyenne signed off. Clay's voice went low and cold. She's not his. Jack shrugged helplessly. Law says otherwise. And if you shoot him, you'll hang. Clay didn't answer. Let me help, Jack said. I got friends. Places she could hide. But Ruthie shook her head when she heard it. I'm tired of running. That night, while Clay tried to plan their next move, Ruthie disappeared. Vanished without a word, without a sound. The front door was open. Her coat was gone. Susie and Luke were asleep, untouched. Clay searched the property. Nothing, not a trace. For hours he combed the woods, rifle over his shoulder, voice hoarse from calling her name. She returned just before sunrise, covered in dirt, breathing hard. Her eyes had a wild shine in them. And something else. Determination. I went to his camp, she said. I know where he's staying. South Ridge, near the old quarry. Clay could hardly believe it. You went alone? I had to. He's not going to stop, Clay. He said he'd come for Susie. That I could give her up now and he'd let the rest of us live. She looked him dead in the eye. I told him I'd kill him before he touched her. Something in Clay split open at those words. She wasn't just brave. She was done being afraid. We need a plan, he said. We need more than guts and a rifle. Ruthie leaned in. I have one. And she did. Clay didn't expect it. Not from someone who looked so fragile, so worn. But Ruthie's plan wasn't about brute force. It was about pulling him out, separating Griggs from his men, making him think he had control, and then ending it. 2 days later, the trap was set. Ruthie rode out with a white cloth tied to her saddle, alone. Luke stayed hidden in the barn rafters with a rifle. Jack Bellamy had come at night, and now waited by the ridge with a shotgun. Clay stood behind the cabin, hidden among the trees, heart thudding like a drum. When Griggs arrived, he did so on horseback, smug and smiling. 2 hired guns flanked him, both mean-looking and armed to the teeth. I knew you'd come to your senses, Griggs said to Ruthie. You can't win. She played her part well, scared, small, tearful. Said she'd give him Susie, but needed to say goodbye. Griggs dismounted. The moment he stepped forward, Jack fired from the ridge, taking out one of the hired men. Luke hit the second with a gut shot from the barn rafters. Griggs spun toward the sound of gunfire, just in time for Clay to step out of the trees, rifle leveled, heart cold. Don't, Griggs sneered. You shoot me, and the law comes down on you like thunder. You'll hang Landry. Clay stepped closer, eyes dark. You ever see what thunder looks like from the inside? Then he pulled the trigger. Griggs fell like a sack of grain, dead before he hit the dirt. Silence hung over the field like smoke. No one moved for a long time. Then Ruthie turned away, knees shaking, arms wrapped around her chest. Clay walked to her, gently pulling her close. She didn't cry. She just breathed, deep, steady breaths that sounded like freedom. They buried the bodies out near the edge of the property. Quietly. No markers. When the sheriff came asking questions a week later, Clay and Ruthie told him the men came to steal the child, that it was self-defense. Jack backed them up. So did Luke. The sheriff didn't push too hard. Maybe he already knew what kind of man Griggs had been. But something shifted after that day. Ruthie stopped, looking over her shoulder. Luke started to laugh again, just now and then, but enough that Clay noticed. And Susie slept through the night for the first time since they'd arrived. Clay sat on the porch most nights with Ruthie beside him, watching the stars come out one by one. I didn't think I'd get to see this, she whispered one evening. See what? Peace. Clay looked at her, then toward the cabin where laughter echoed faintly. Neither did I, he said. But here it was. Hard-won. Fragile. Real. The calm didn't last. Not because the past came back again, but because peace had a cost, and Clay had never paid it before. It started slow, like rot under floorboards. Ruthie smiled more, yes, and the kids grew lighter, sure. But something in Clay stayed clenched. At night, long after the house had gone quiet, he'd sit at the edge of the bed, staring at the shadows across the floor. He saw Griggs in them sometimes, the look in the man's eyes just before he died. Not regret, Just shock. Like he couldn't believe someone had finally stopped him. Ruthie noticed. "You haven't slept," she whispered one night. "Not really." He didn't answer. "Do you regret it?" she asked. Clay blinked slow. "No." She reached for his hand. "Then what's haunting you?" He wanted to tell her. Wanted to say he felt like a man who'd gone too far to turn back, like the line between right and wrong had blurred so badly he couldn't find it anymore. That he'd killed a man and felt more relief than guilt. That maybe, just maybe, some part of him liked the power of that moment, the moment when he decided how the story would end. But he didn't say any of that. He just gripped her hand tighter. "I'm trying to feel okay again," he said. "You don't have to do it alone." The next morning, Sheriff Daly came riding out again. Not with accusations, but with news. The judge who'd signed Griggs's custody papers? Dead. Poisoned. And now there was talk that Griggs had been part of something larger. Land fraud, blackmail, even murder. The governor had launched an inquiry, and suddenly, Clay and Ruthie weren't just two people living on the edge of nowhere. They were witnesses. Loose threads. "They might come asking questions," Daly said. "And if they do, you tell them what you told me. Self-defense. You saved a child from being stolen. That's it. But nothing's ever that clean." 2 weeks later, a man in a suit rode up with a badge that didn't belong to Pine Hollow. Deputy U.S. Marshal. East Coast accent, crisp suit, shoes too clean for a ranch road. "I'm here to speak with Mr. Landry and Miss Allen," he said, "regarding the death of Mr. Griggs." Clay stood on the porch, Ruthie behind him, hand resting lightly on his back. The marshal didn't smile. "We have reason to believe Griggs was involved with a network of men tied to land theft and the trafficking of minors. If that child," he pointed to the door where Susie peeked out, "is biologically his, there may be a claim." Ruthie stiffened. "She's not." Still, the marshal said smoothly, "We'll need to test that. And talk to you both. In Cheyenne." Clay's chest tightened. "You're trying to take her?" The marshal lifted a brow. "I'm trying to protect the child, Mr. Landry. And the law requires." "No," Ruthie said sharply, stepping forward. "The law didn't protect us when he was alive. And it won't tear us apart now that he's dead." The marshal sighed. "You can come willingly, or I can return with a warrant." Ruthie trembled. Clay stepped in front of her. "We'll come, but she stays here." The marshal hesitated, then nodded once. "You got a week." He turned and rode off like he'd already won. The next days were hard. Ruthie hardly spoke. She cleaned until her hands cracked. And when Susie asked questions, she just pulled her in her lap and whispered stories that didn't end. Luke grew quiet too. He watched everything, like he was waiting for something to explode. Like he knew the life they'd built might not hold. Clay tried to act like it didn't scare him. But he felt it too. The fear of being dragged into a courtroom, treated like criminals instead of survivors. Of being pulled into a system that didn't care about truth, only power. Jack came by one night, sat with Clay on the porch, the whiskey bottle between them. "You don't have to go," Jack said. "You could vanish. Take him west. Change your name." Clay stared out at the fields. "I could, but I'd be teaching those kids to run forever." Jack nodded. "Then you go. But not alone. I wasn't planning to." A week later, they rode into Cheyenne. Clay, Ruthie, and Susie. Luke stayed behind with Jack. Safer that way. The city was too loud, too tight. People everywhere, buildings tall and hard. Ruthie looked like she was holding her breath the whole time. Clay kept a hand near his holster, even in the hotel room. They sat in a courtroom 2 days later. The marshal was there. So was a lawyer for the government. No one from Griggs's family showed. No one dared. Ruthie had to speak first. She told the story straight. No drama. Just facts. What Griggs had done. What he'd threatened. The truth about Susie. And they called Clay. He hated it. Every word. He didn't like talking about himself. About what he'd done. But he told them how Griggs rode in, how he came with men and guns, how he tried to take a child who was never his, and how Clay stopped him. The room was quiet when he finished. Not a single cough. Not a breath. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and soft hands, looked at them long and hard. "You could have run," she said. We did, Ruthie replied, and it nearly killed us. The judge nodded. Then she did something no one expected. She asked to speak to Susie, just for a moment. Clay's jaw clenched. Ruthie hesitated, but then Susie walked forward, her dress too big and her hands fidgeting. Do you feel safe with them? The judge asked gently. Susie nodded. They love me. That was all. They won. It wasn't a parade or a speech or a celebration. Just a stamp paper and a nod. But it meant everything. They left Cheyenne before nightfall. Clay never looked back. When they returned to Pine Hollow, Luke was waiting at the gate. He ran to them, hugged Ruthie, punched Clay in the arm, then pulled Susie onto his shoulders like she was light as a feather. But things weren't perfect. Clay found himself jumpy. Every knock at the door made his heart race. Ruthie had nightmares again, ones that made her cry out in the dark. And Susie? She started drawing pictures of monsters, big ones with sharp teeth and sad eyes. One night, while Ruthie bathed the children, Clay sat with Jack again. You think it ever really ends? Clay asked. Jack took a long sip. No, but it gets quieter. What if I don't want quiet? What if I want peace? Jack chuckled. Then you've got to earn it. Every damn day. And so they did. Ruthie started teaching at the little school down the road. Susie joined the other children, made a friend who gave her flowers and called her brave. Luke started working with Jack at the smithy, hammer in hand, learning how to shape something from fire and force. Clay built a fence, one that ran strong and straight along the border of the property. He didn't build it to keep people out, but to remind himself where his life started now. Inside that fence, he wasn't just the man who lost everything. He was the man who'd saved someone, who'd loved someone, who had something to lose again. One morning, Ruthie brought him coffee on the porch. They watched the sun rise over the hills. You still feel like giving up? She asked quietly. Clay looked at her, at the home behind them, at the two children playing in the dirt with sticks and laughter. No, he said, not anymore. And he meant it, every word. Clay never thought the past would come back like a wildfire, fast, hot, and impossible to control. He'd been wrong. It didn't creep in slowly, no gentle knock on the door. It tore through the thin piece he'd built, ripping open old wounds and dragging secrets out of the shadows where he'd buried them deep. It started the morning Jack showed up at the cabin, face pale and hands shaking. Clay, you need to see this, he said, holding out a folded letter, edges worn like it had been carried in a pocket for months. Clay took it, unfolded the paper, and scanned the words. His heart hammered. The letter was from a man named Thomas Griggs. Not the man Clay had killed. Another Griggs, Griggs's brother. A name Clay hadn't heard spoken aloud since the shooting. The letter claimed that Susie wasn't just Griggs's child. She was part of a bigger lie, a plan that reached farther than anyone had guessed. The letter said Ruthie had been involved, that she'd known about the child's true parentage and kept it secret, not just from Clay, but from everyone. Clay's blood turned cold. He looked at Ruthie, who had come into the room quietly, drying her hands on her apron. Her eyes caught his, and something like fear flickered in them, but then she masked it quickly. What's that? She asked, voice steady. A letter, Clay said. From the brother. Says you knew. Says you lied. Ruthie swallowed. I didn't lie. I protected them. You don't understand. Then tell me. His voice was low, almost strangled. Tell me everything. She took a breath, eyes flickering away. Griggs's brother came to me months before Daniel died. Said he wanted to take Susie. Said she was a bargaining chip in a land deal, something my family had no part in, but that could ruin us if we didn't comply. I was scared. I kept it from you to keep you safe, to keep the kids safe. Clay shook his head, trying to swallow the hurt twisting in his chest. You should have told me. We were supposed to be partners. I was protecting you, Ruthie said, voice trembling. I thought I was doing the right thing. The room was heavy with silence. Luke and Susie played quietly nearby, unaware of the storm swirling in the adult's eyes. Days passed with a slow, grinding tension between Clay and Ruthie. He watched her differently now. not just as the woman who'd saved him from himself, but as someone capable of secrets and mistakes that could unravel them all. Then came the stranger. One late afternoon, a man rode in from the south, tall and lean with eyes like cold steel. He introduced himself as Jeremiah Griggs, the real brother behind the threats, the one who'd sent the letter. He said he wanted peace, said he wanted to make sure Susie was safe, said he wanted to deal fairly for once. Clay didn't trust him. Ruthie wanted to believe him. They argued, hard, sharp words thrown like knives in the kitchen. Jeremiah said he'd come with proof that could clear Ruthie's name and end the fight for good. He had papers, land deeds, even a note from the judge that suggested the custody claim had been forged. Clay stayed silent, watching Ruthie wrestle with her hope and doubt. The night before Jeremiah was to reveal his evidence, a fire broke out in the barn. Clay was the first on the scene, smelling smoke thick and bitter. The children were inside the house, but the barn was full of tools, food stores, everything they needed to survive winter. Flames licked high, red and hungry. Clay fought the fire with water and dirt, but it was clear someone had started it on purpose. He looked at Ruthie, at the tears running down her face. "This isn't over," he said. "No," she whispered. The next morning, Jeremiah disappeared. Clay felt the weight of betrayal settle hard. Someone had burned the barn. Someone had lied to them all. He looked at Ruthie, searching for answers. She looked back, weary and broken. "Who do you trust?" he asked. "I don't know anymore," she said. Their world cracked open, exposing old fears, old pain, old wounds that bled deeper than any bullet. Luke and Susie needed them, but Clay and Ruthie were falling apart. In that broken place, Clay made a choice. He took Ruthie's hand and said, "We face this together. No more secrets." She nodded, hope flickering faint but real. Together, they tracked down the truth. They found the forged papers, uncovered the men behind the land schemes. Men who wanted to tear families apart for money and power. And in the end, they faced the hardest choice of all. Jeremiah, caught and cornered, begged for mercy, said he only wanted what was his. Clay looked at Ruthie, searching her eyes. She said nothing. Clay raised his rifle one last time, but didn't shoot. "I'm done fighting ghosts," he said. Jeremiah was sent away. No trial, but no more threats. The law finally stepped in, slow but sure. Ruthie and Clay rebuilt what was broken. The barn, the trust, the fragile peace. But scars remained. One evening, as the sun set low and the children slept inside, Ruthie whispered, "I was scared to lose you." Clay held her close. "I was ready to give up until you came along. Now I'm ready to fight for us." And fight they would, against the darkness outside and the shadows inside. Because sometimes love wasn't enough. Sometimes survival meant facing the truth, no matter how painful. And in that truth, they found a kind of freedom. The cold light of morning spilled through the window, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floorboards. Clay sat at the edge of the bed, watching Ruthie as she gently braided Susie's hair, her fingers moving with a tenderness that made his heart ache and swell all at once. Outside, Luke's laughter echoed faintly as he chased a stray dog around the yard. For the first time in a long while, the world felt quiet. Not because it was safe, but because they'd carved out a small corner of peace amidst the storm. The weight of everything they'd been through still pressed heavy in Clay's chest. The secrets, the betrayals, the violence, they had all left their marks. But more than scars on skin, they were imprinted deep in the soul. Clay thought back to the man he had been before Ruthie and those two children walked in his life. The man ready to give up, drowning in grief and bitterness. Now, that man felt distant, like a shadow, slipping away with the night. Ruthie looked up and caught his gaze, a quiet understanding passing between them. No words were needed. They'd both carried their burdens alone too long and learned the hard way that survival wasn't about strength alone. It was about trust, forgiveness, and the messy, stubborn kind of love that refused to let go. Later that day, Clay stood outside by the newly rebuilt barn. The sun warmed his face, and a gentle breeze stirred the tall grass. He ran his hand over the rough timber, a symbol not just of rebuilding, but of something more: hope. It wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was theirs. Luke and Susie came running over, their faces flushed with excitement. "Look, Pa!" Luke shouted, holding up a bird's nest they'd found in the branches above. Clay smiled, lifting Susie into his arms, her little hands clutching at his shirt. The children's joy was pure and fierce, a reminder that even after the darkest nights, life found a way to bloom. As evening fell, Clay sat by the fire with Ruthie, the flickering flames painting their faces in golden shadow. They spoke little, but the silence between them was full of promises kept, mistakes forgiven, and the unspoken truth that they'd survived more than just the dangers lurking outside. They'd survived each other. Before bed, Clay looked out toward the horizon, where the stars were beginning to pierce the twilight. He thought about the long road ahead, the challenges they would still face, and the memories that would never fade. Yet, beneath it all, a quiet strength had taken root, a strength born from hardship and healing alike. Ruthie joined him, her hand finding his in the dark. "You ready for tomorrow?" she asked softly. Clay nodded, squeezing her hand. "With you? Always." And in that simple truth, they found the courage to keep moving forward together, carrying the past but never letting it define them, holding on to the fragile, hard-won hope that life, no matter how broken or bruised, was still worth fighting for. As the fire dwindled and the night deepened, Clay whispered a quiet prayer, not for what had been lost, but for what had been found. A family, a home, a second chance. The West stretched wide and wild beyond their door, full of unknowns and dangers. But here, in this small patch of earth and love, Clay knew they were ready to face whatever came next, not as broken souls, but as a family bound by something stronger than fear, the unyielding power of hope.